Well, welcome to What's Your 20? I'm your host, Carl Figueredo, and today we're joined with union production designer Mark Freeborn. Now, I've had the opportunity to be talking with Mark for a little bit now, and I've looked through the IMDb, and it's very extensive. If you have time to feel free to check it out. One fond memory that I had that I've been talking to him about is his show Alcatraz that he did. Me and my father would always watch it and have... I don't know, it was a nice couch time with him just to have that father-son bonding moment. The first question I'd love to ask you that I ask every guest is, what is production designing to you? What does it mean to be a production designer?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. Principally, it's supplying the stage for the performers to work on. It's digesting a script or a concept for a series and trying to attach a visual link to that script that makes sense to the audience, that makes sense to the various directors you may have in an episodic situation. One of the things that I've always felt is production design, at least in the vehicles that I tend to work in, is a background player as opposed to a main stage player. By that I mean the script is what is important, and it's the production designer's job to enhance the script by adding the details that are necessary but not overwhelming the characters.
Interesting. So when you say you operate as the background character to the script, do you ever diverge too much from the script and add your own elements, or is it whatever's written in the script is what you'll definitely provide and then extras on top of that, or how does it work?
Well, on reading a script, you walk away with some concept of what's required. First of all, physically. Second of all, from a character enhancement point of view. If you're talking episodic television, for instance, we generally start with a concept or a beat sheet that's 10 to 15 pages that gives us an outline of what the director and the writers expect. I've had the good fortune of working with some extremely talented writers who literally create images in text. And it happened early enough in my career that I found that it gave me a good grounding on how to approach the project visually. I'm very visually oriented. I tend to close my eyes in production meetings. Some people think I'm dozing off, but I'm actually trying to get into the head of the character, get into the script.
Awesome. And so you spend a lot of time with the writers and the director hand in hand, or I guess it would depend, TV to features?
No, generally no. The projects, I've rarely been in a situation where a half-formed project has come my way. The script comes fully formed, or one hope would come fully formed, and the important thing is to make sure that you have a link with. You try to get a little bit closer to the writer, the concept artist, if you like, and a little bit closer to the director, and in some cases act as a mediator between the two.
I could only imagine if they had differing perspectives.
It's happened. It has happened. But I have been, as I say, I've been very fortunate. I've worked with, I did feature films until I met Chris Carter, and was very impressed with the way his scripts and his writer's scripts all painted such a rich picture of each episode that they did. So going in, I had much more ammunition, and it was much easier to create what they perceived visually.
And one thing that actually popped up a lot in the questions that I'm going to ask you later, but in a situation that you're brought into a TV series halfway through it, and you have to follow another production designer's work, what usually happens there? How do you make it your own? Do you try to make it your own, or is it try to follow word for word what they did?
That's only happened about 5 times for me. So in situations like that, more than once I've been brought in because there hasn't been a visual connection between the writer's room and the production designer. And there are certainly other situations, but I really take my beat from the writers, from the producers about how they want to, if there is a change in regimes, how they want, what they need, what was lacking in the previous administration's perception of their work, how I can make it better. In one particular situation, there was a problem with the designer, and as a courtesy, the producers will ask you if you want to replace the crew, and I've never done that because unless there's a direct problem with the crew, it doesn't make sense. They have a grip on the continuity of the project to that point, and they can also help you to provide the elements that have been lacking to that point.
Yeah, most definitely, because they'd have that inside look and already know what is going wrong, potentially.
Yeah.
I always foresee, as well as a DP and production designer, sort of in the same hats, that you guys are in charge of so many different elements and different departments, essentially. In the indie world, you're looking after, you are the designer for like props and the set decoration. How do you manage so many people on your crew?
For me, the most important visual connection outside of the writer's room is the director of photography. That person has a perception of what they need, of what their approach is, and everybody understands at this point that there has been some discussion about which way it's going to go visually. So working in terms of color and space and light, I try to work very closely with the director of photography so that person has all the tools that they need to create the atmosphere that's required for the show. The distinct advantage I have is I ain't going to be there when the camera rolls.
Yeah.
The director of photography is. So it's the art department's responsibility to support that person in any way we possibly can. In a perfect world, the personal relationship you establish with that department is very, very important. In fact, the personal relationship you establish with anybody on the production team is important.
Yeah, most definitely. Like one thing that we've mentioned a lot on this podcast is that everyone in their own departments are trying to elevate the project, but the end goal is always the same, to try to make this baby. We've been mentioning it as like a little baby, and we're just trying to make it the best thing that it can be by the end of it.
Yes, I think the best. Well, all I can say, I've been very fortunate, but I have to say that the best example of that and the best experience I had overall with all of that has to have been Breaking Bad, which interestingly enough I walked into at the top of season 3. I think that the best way to describe the relationship I had with, or we had, the crew, the producers, the writers, is I went back to do a season of Better Call Saul after a 3-year absence, and it was really like a family reunion. I was glad to see everybody. They were glad to see me. We had a certain shorthand already, and it was a good feeling. It was a good experience.
No, that's incredible to know that even in these higher levels that we're still fortunate enough to be braced by those situations. Speaking of being brought back into a new season, have you ever had an experience where the budget has been cut from one season to the next season? And how do you manage a situation like that when your budget's being cut and they still expect the same results?
I've never had that experience. Believe it or not, I have never had a significant budget cut from one season to the next. There have been practical budget cuts, for instance, when you've got all of your standing sets established, you don't require as much. What I have done on more than one occasion is walked into a situation where they haven't got enough money to do what they want to do. And that, from the outset, can have a pretty significant effect in the overall look of the product.
Definitely.
There's one that comes to mind where I was actually charged with recreating some sets and locations, and my budget was a third of what it needed to be. And I sat down with a construction coordinator, and we worked through the budget, and I sat with the producers, and I basically said, do you want this show or not, visually? And I will say, it has only been one time that they've said, maybe you're right. And I've had my budget adjusted.
Right.
But every project going in, just about every project has budget problems. They are the economics of the studio doesn't necessarily take into account the practical aspects of actually putting on the show that they think they're going to get.
Yeah.
I think The Last of Us, I have not had any experience with The Last of Us except as a viewer, but I am pretty sure that, at least in the beginning, they had some interesting budget discussions, because it is a big, big, big show.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. When you're creating a world in the design department, do you prefer constructing sets or replacing or adjusting set locations, or do you have any input in that?
Regarding input, yes, absolutely. We have input. From the point of view of creative freedom, always like to build over modifying locations. But both have their own sets of challenges. Both have their own sets of advantages. So it's really a matter of what's best for the show visually. So I will happily go into onto a remote location and do what we need to do to make it work for the script.
Have you ever had a situation that you haven't been given enough time to prep? Because that's something I always find in the indie land that, like, okay, well, we got 4 days, 5 days, or a week to prep a show that really needs like 3-4 weeks to prep. Have you ever been in that situation?
Have you seen Breaking Bad?
I actually have not.
I started on season 3,
yeah.
And Vince Gilligan's writer's room had provided breakdowns for the entire season. So as I was reading through the breakdowns, episode 3 called for the Super Lab, which caused me to have a brief heart palpitation, simply because there wasn't enough production time to have it ready for season 3. Everything, we were shooting in Albuquerque, everything had to be brought in. The set decoration department and the prop department started sourcing. In the middle of episode 1, I went to the producers and said, "I can't do this for season 3." Explained why carefully. We had at that point approved plans and concepts, and I asked them politely if there was a way that they could push it an episode. I'm sorry, which they did, and I'm eternally grateful. But yeah, that was a sprint from beginning to end, that set.
Yeah, actually, I have been. This is another question that is, funnily enough, going to pop up about the lab. When you're beginning to get into the mindset of creating a space like that, how do you go about it? And how do you do your research to find out what goes into those sets?
Experience.
Yeah. Being around the block, I've seen some things.
Well, I do have some experience in how can I phrase it?
Medical field.
Illicit pharmaceuticals. And I'm not talking about use at all. My background prior to the film industry had some connections. Mm-hmm. You take your beat from the script. You know what you have to find. For instance, if you know you need a crack house, you and your support team start researching crack houses, both from a documentation point of view and a visual point of view, just to get a handle on what the basic parameters are. And build from there. You start put together conceptual drawings or concept plans. You have discussions with the producers and writers about what they need to see specifically. About, for instance, in the case of a crack house, how far do you want to push it? How bad does it have to be? That kind of thing. We had an interesting. This predates my tenure on Breaking Bad, but we had a set dresser who was in Albuquerque, born and bred, and when they were trying to figure out the meth lab, nobody really had an idea of the mechanics of making meth at that point. They in the production meetings, they would discuss it. They'd start asking specific questions about how the process worked. And this particular individual said, "Let me make a call." So he got up, left the meeting, made a phone call, came back, had the answer. This happened about 3 times. And the writers were grateful. The prop department was grateful. somebody wasn't grateful. Early one Sunday morning, 2 DEA agents rapped on his door.
Oh.
He'd been somebody had suggested perhaps he knew a little too much about the business. As it turned out, the people who went to investigate realized immediately what had happened, and it was all good. In fact, by the end of the process, and this goes to research too, we had a DEA chemist and a field agent who acted as consultants.
Right.
So if we had questions about legal authority or even sometimes chemical questions, then we would go to the source and find out what we could find out.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because that I know that's something that happens a lot, like bringing in someone who's in that field, and I was going to be like, who would be in that field for the illicit substance? But DEA agents would be the legal way to do it.
Breaking Bad is something of an anomaly.
Yes.
But one of the things I encountered over and over again when I was working in Albuquerque was people would come up as soon as they found out that's what we were doing. They would come up and say, "I've heard a lot about your show. I can't watch it because a family member is." But those people turned into resources. You could ask them questions that you might not get a straight answer from in other situations.
Yeah, most definitely. That inside look of how the outside perspective would be closer to the matter.
Yeah.
When you bring on your team, do you usually just bring in your art director and then let them hire the rest of the team, or how do you prefer to operate?
Well, it depends on where I am. I generally like the art director to hire the support team because they will be the people who deal most directly with those most often. We do it with the understanding that I have final say on who that person might be, but generally that's the approach I like to use.
Awesome. And then do you bring your team, are you someone who sticks around with your team? I remember you mentioned a lot about the shows you most enjoyed are the ones that are like family. Do you have a core team that you bring around with you, or do you prefer to find new individuals?
I think the best way to answer that is yes, I have a core team, but there is always an opening. There's always somebody who has another job, can't participate for one reason or another. So inevitably there may be 1, 2, 3 people who are new to your team, and it's good for everybody. You get to know you get to know the talent pool better. They get to experience a different production team, and you grow that way. And there have been occasions when, well, if I work out of town, I have, as I said, I've taken over a couple of shows, and I've never not hired the people who were on the show prior to my arrival. And it's always worked out very well. I mean, it has a lot to do with respect for the fact that if there is a problem, it's generally not them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, most definitely.
Yeah.
And this is probably a question that I'm sure I'll end up being asked. From what we were talking about earlier, you seem like you enjoy being a voice to the younger generations and someone who wants to see the success of the industry. What do you look for when you bring on someone new? Or what do you want and expect from a newer member?
If I'm interviewing somebody cold who's never worked in the business before, I look for enthusiasm. I look for creativity. I look for some sign of a genuine desire to be in the art department or in the film industry, and an enthusiasm for the work. What I look for is somebody who will jump up and say, "I'll do that."
Yeah, the
And
can-do
that's
attitude.
the first time somebody does that with me, I know that it's going to go in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. Not just that person in the corner who's like, as soon as the task is done, goes on Facebook or.
I have had experiences. I had one experience where we had a person in the art department who would go and do their assigned task and come back and literally sit in the corner waiting for somebody to instruct them. I, I don't understand that.
No,
I don't understand that.
no, I agree, because it's like, whilst they're sitting in the corner, someone else, essentially, if they haven't asked them a question, someone else has to think about their job as well as their own job.
Yeah.
Keeping it productive like that.
I will. One of the strongest examples of that I have ever seen, and it has nothing to do with the art department whatsoever. I had just taken over a Chris Carter show called Millennium, and we had a sequence that was in a forested area north of Vancouver. And we had a helicopter sequence the same day at a different location. And I arrived on set just as they were wrapping up the first one. And there was a torrential downpour. And the first thing I said was, nobody's got rain gear. And the second thing was, everybody's running. And it took me a minute to put things together, but the entire crew was running to get the second half of that shot because they would absolutely lose it if it went past dark.
Yeah.
And I just thought, that's a team effort.
Definitely.
That's how people work together. And it really, it knocked me out. It was one of those, because I was fairly new to Vancouver at that point. And I basically thought, I'm at home. I'm home. You know?
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about the film industry. It's those moments, and I get it sometimes on the union aspect. I get it a lot when I'm working in the indie world, of the passion of the crew all coming together, because I've experienced it a lot with especially when I jump onto the volunteer projects, because it's like you're literally doing this for no benefit except for to see the project to fruition. Mm-hmm. And it is something that I really cherish about the film industry itself. Question for you. So when you're working with either your DOP or your director, have you ever had an instance that you potentially didn't see eye to eye, and how do you navigate around those circumstances?
We won't talk about those.
Yeah, no worries.
Generally speaking, there's always something, and from my personal perspective, it has more to do with personality than practicality. You're inevitably going to. You're in an industry where everybody is an alpha personality. Yeah. So it is inevitable that you're going to run into somebody who you're going to have an issue with.
Yeah.
I try to keep a level head, and because I mean, I consider myself a field hand. I'm the person who has to get the set ready, get the paint ready, make sure the props are ready, make sure that the costume department knows what I'm going to do, because they need to know to do what they need to do. So I I try to be as I try to be as accommodating and communicative as I possibly can be. So yeah, I've had a couple of issues, but thankfully not too many.
Oh, nice, awesome. I'm not sure if you're familiar with. There's an Instagram and Facebook postings for shitty rigs. Have you ever seen that?
Never have.
Okay, so essentially it's, and I want to say that it's more for the indie side of things where they jerry-rig together a few different elements to try to make something else work. Have you ever had a time in your work that you've had like either a prop potentially didn't come in on time and you had to makeshift something to make something else work? Have you ever had a situation that you've had a shitty rig?
Have I ever had a situation where I haven't? It's inevitable. And I've either blocked the bad ones. Yeah, it's inevitable. But I think one of the things that I think is important is if you're in a corner in this business, there's not one solution. There's five.
Yeah.
And part of your job is to find the best of those five and make it work. Yeah, we've had situations with late props. We've had situations with construction that isn't quite done quite on time. We've had, but I mean, overall, I don't think we've had a really bad situation ever, like a bad, shitty prop situation. We've had, I think from my perspective, the worst thing is miscommunication, where what you think they say and what they think they say are two different things.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the shitty prop situation.
Communication is definitely key in our industry. Yeah. I actually had a situation on my last indie that I just did. They had adjusted the script a day before shooting, and in the script adjustment, they had put 5 alternate intros, but didn't label any of them. So when going through it, they had the writers and the director had told me, okay, well, don't worry about scheduling any of these because they're all written into the script. And then when we got to the day that we were shooting it, we went back through and we're like, no, this has a different person in this scene. This has these different props, and this has. It was one of those situations again that like everything was brought in like really last minute, and communication's key.
Like there's the two words you don't want to hear are "don't worry."
No, yeah. Every time I hear that as an AD, I'm like, okay, well, maybe you don't have to worry about it.
It's just a little pickup.
Yeah, it's fine. It's not something that anyone needs to stress about. Again, I speak from the indie perspective, but pickups. And speaking of pickups, what happens for you when a show needs to do a bunch of pickups? Like, because from my experience, it's they shoot the season or they shoot all the episodes, and then maybe they have another day that pops up a few weeks down the track that they're like, oh, well, we've missed all these shots. What tends to happen, or have you ever experienced that? I'm sure you've probably experienced.
What tends to happen?
Yeah, what happens with these pickups, these mythical pickups I hear about?
Almost anything can happen. This is a pretty top-down industry, and I'm not talking. I'm talking like writers, directors, production team, ADs, production team. The onus is on the writers and the directors to know what they want.
Yeah.
The onus is on the AD to communicate what they want.
Yeah.
and the onus is on the production team to create what they want. What happens is, at the worst of circumstances, inserts and pickups are really easy things for a writer to add or director to add.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily an easy thing for the prop department or the art department or any other production department to pick up on. And it really all backs up to communication again.
Yeah.
And in the case of pickups, I think that the most important link in the chain is the first AD. Yeah. They have to be on top of what they have to, and it's a lot about perception too. They really need to know who they're working with and what may happen during the course of production, so that they know what to expect in terms of pickups. I mean, I hate to do this, but going back to Breaking Bad, in the all the seasons I did Breaking Bad, 1 day of pickups.
Really?
For the entire season.
Wow. And
they got all their pickups and inserts as they shot, and they had a day of loose ends at the end of the season.
Oh, well, the work speaks for itself. It especially what you're mentioning. It seems like a really good, well-oiled machine that everyone knew what was happening.
That particular show was indeed a well-oiled machine, and it all is based on respect. While your departments may be separate, people have to understand that each department is equally responsible for making the show work.
Yeah.
So if you're not getting information from the writers, they're not going to get what they want. If you're not getting what they need from a production designer, the writers aren't getting what. You have to talk. There has to be an open forum about how you shoot anything.
When we're in the office, is your office usually pretty close to the prop master and the set decorator, or how do your meetings usually work, and how do you have your communication with them?
Not necessarily. I mean, physically, it depends on the physical space. I mean, on Grease, which we finished last year, I was on the third floor. Set deck was directly below me on the second floor, and props was on the first floor. But we would meet regularly. I'd visit set deck to look at fabrics and furniture and textures and that kind of thing. I'd check in with props daily. I would participate in the prop meeting, which generally was held separate from any other art department meeting. And the one thing that I got in the habit of doing a few years ago was we would hold the general production meeting, and I would hold a second art department meeting after that meeting to make sure that everybody understood what we had to do. And it was an open meeting, so anybody who It was an open invitation, so anybody who thought they should be there could be there. And the director was invited. The writers were invited. Anybody from the production team who felt the need to be there would be there. And it works. It's just takes care of as many of those little tiny things that you don't cover in the big production meeting. You know, anywhere from color to how the cap comes off a beer bottle. But,
yeah, screw,
yeah,
pop.
Yeah.
Awesome. And this last question will actually take us to a break here, but what are some tips you would give to a new production designer who's starting out? Or like, what would you recommend after your years of experience? These are, for someone just starting out, these are 3 steps that I think you should do to make yourself better. Or checklist.
Work in every department you possibly can. You can't. You have to understand the other person's situation. You have to know that the scenic department needs to know the paint colors before the set decoration department walks in the door. You have to know that the wardrobe department needs to know what colors you're going to use so that the actors don't disappear behind a camouflage situation. The grip department needs to know if you need any special requirements, like what is the ceiling material, whether it needs to be lit. There's all kinds of side conversations that take place between the various departments, and at some point or other they have to coalesce. And the only way to really understand all of it is to spend time in other people's shoes. So if that person has an opportunity to be a PA in the prop department, do it. Be a PA a driver for the wardrobe department, do it. A schlepper for the set deck department, do it. The person on the other end of the pipe for the grip department. It all has to come together as a whole in a really, really short period of time.
Yeah.
Particularly with episodic. You can walk into episodic on Monday and have to produce everything you need for the next episode in 7 days. So,
yeah, that's a whole different ballgame, episodic, because especially being someone who is in charge of making every single episode, because it's from what I can tell, it's the one person who doesn't get swapped out from episode to episode. You're in charge of the look for the season.
Yeah, it would be hard. It would be hard. You could do it if you had a strong support team. If you had, for instance, a pair of art directors that you could alternate between episodes just to make sure that everything was tied together. But there really has to be a common thread throughout that. I mean, for directors of photography, it's a little easier because they can establish camera, lighting concepts, that kind of thing before we actually start to work. Wardrobe, the designer has to be consistent, just to keep the thread going. I had a situation where I had an art director who asked to do an episode of a series that I was doing, and that person, this goes to continuity. There's a continuity of look that you try and maintain through a series, and they went a little sideways on it, and I had to adjust before we went to camera, and that has to do with it has to do with two things. It has to do with communication, and it has to do with the cohesiveness of the production. Like, everybody has to be there with the same vision and looking for the same answer.
Yeah, it's nothing worse than, I guess, a director walking in and is like, why is this thing like this? I feel like we've had all these discussions about it.
Yeah, it can be pretty bad. Because you're at the pointy end.
Yeah, no, right? Most definitely. It's like, well, there's only one person in charge of this look.
And gratefully, it hasn't happened too often, but there's nothing quite as eye-opening as being eviscerated in front of the entire production team.
Yeah, no, I could only imagine.
Yeah.
Anyway, this will take us to a break. We'll be back in a sec. Awesome. And welcome back to this side of the break. So we've learned a lot about what a production designer is, and then some little quibs and quos about the industry and your experience in it so far. One thing I'd love to find out from you is your make it or break it moment in film where it was just not your day, essentially, and like how you overcame it.
You asked me that earlier, and I'm not sure that I can say that I ever had one.
Really?
I've had moments where I would dearly love to strangle a person or two, but in the overview, I've always gotten way too much from the industry to reject it. I was sitting with a producer friend on set, and it was on a particularly chaotic show, and I turned to her and said, "Have you ever thought that you should have taken that job in the bank?" And she looked at me and she said, "Never. I wouldn't miss this for anything." And that was on a very bad day.
Yeah.
And those are the people that make the industry so great. Is it might get you down, but I don't know too many people who have actually been broken.
Would you say the industry is getting more people like that, or are we, because we're influxing so many people in the industry, are we diluting that?
Yeah,
What are your thoughts?
Absolutely not getting more people like that. I think that the growth of the industry has been so ridiculously radical, especially since the advent of streaming, that the union, well, everybody, every organization that supplies crews was starving for experienced people, which meant that a lot of people were joining because of the paycheck. And I think that we still suffer from a significant number of people who have that attitude. And there's also, we really need more training opportunities, because that's where you really find out who wants to be here and who doesn't want to be here. Well, when I was in Toronto, I used to go to New York about once every 3 weeks.
Really?
Oh yeah.
No, that would be an awesome trek, because it's so close to each other, and the theater shows in New York are incredible.
Oh yeah, no. Well, all it did was cement my interest. I just got more and more interested, and we did. I worked summer stock in 2 different summer stock theaters. I built the original Tarragon Theater interior in Toronto. It was, the whole thing was just, and it was so far away from where I was, like socially, spiritually, intellectually. It was just, I swear I probably would have been dead years ago if I hadn't found it.
Yeah.
No, it was the people I hung out with when I was younger, before I got into theater, were pretty much redneck white trash, good old boy kind of,
Yeah, I was much the same with the Bogans in Australia.
I said, yeah, I'm working on this theater thing, and of course the aforementioned woman was, she was spectacularly beautiful, as was her friend, and they knew she would be there, so they assumed that there would be a bunch of
right.
So they started hanging around, and the thing that happened was, like, this is in a little town with this big, and it really was an underground community. Like, none of my crowd knew anything about it at all. But by the time the production was over, 4 of them came out. 4. 3 of them were experimenting. 1 of them came out and stayed out. This is like...
Dang, because this isn't I would assume a time that it's not very common to be coming out to a lot of people, and that's incredible.
No, it didn't. This was all insular. This was all within, like, nobody. I mean, it didn't go outside our circle at all. But surprised the hell out of me. And then she left to do a summer stock season, and I did the only thing I could, which was follow her. And one thing led to another, you know. But it just, I mean, it opened my eyes on so many levels. And I think you can see from my resume that my preference really is like real human drama, you know. And because there was that aspect of my life. My mother she was an occupational therapist, and she worked at Rideau Regional Hospital in Kingston, which is the equivalent of Riverview. And she was also a president of the Elizabeth Fry Society. I don't know if you're aware of them, but what it is it's a pre-release program for female federal prisoners.
Okay.
So she would bring people home for dinner that you normally wouldn't meet.
Yeah.
But the whole thing was, I mean, it was like, oh, man, there's a lot going on in the world here.
No, most definitely.
And, I just, I couldn't have landed anywhere else better than where I landed.
Yeah, that's an incredible display of your story to bring you to where you are now, and brings us into the following question. And it's something I've asked everyone on this show, mental health in the industry. And I love to ask the heads of department because it's being in this higher up position. I imagine there's always a lot more stress that's potentially involved, and potential finger pointing. Have you ever experienced things with mental health, or do you see any relations in the art department and your teams that you could speak upon?
Well, mental health and finger pointing are 2 entirely different.
True. Yes.
Right.
I mean, like finger pointing to create some mental health problems. Like if another team is like, well, it was their fault. They did X, Y, and Z, and that produces more stress upon yourself or someone in your position.
Have I been the victim of finger pointing? Yes. Have I ever pointed a finger? No. Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson?
The name sounds really
Jordan
familiar,
Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist who has gotten a lot of press lately because he says what he believes. And he's written a book called 12 Rules, and I watched a YouTube clip of him recently where an interviewer asked him what of the 12 rules, what was the most important, and he thought for a minute, and he said, tell the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that eliminates a lot of finger pointing from my perspective. As a head of department, it's my fault. If somebody screws up in my department, it's still my fault. Will I address that problem? Yes. I have in the past been less than pleasant about it. I won't tolerate any kind of bigotry, misogyny, anything like that within my department, because there's no place for it. First of all, it destroys the family team concept. There's no need for it. It does happen, but I try and address it in a way that's productive for everybody. And I'm no saint. I've misstepped several times, 100 times in my life. But I'll give you an example. I had a situation some years ago with an art director who was being misogynistic with one of the support people in the art department. And she, to her credit, came to me and said that, well, what she said was she was going to leave because she couldn't deal with it. So I phoned the union and I said, the process is 3 letters of reprimand, and then the union will do something about it. I thought this guy was smart enough and valuable enough that he deserved to have the opportunity to correct his situation. So I said, here's what I want to do. I'll write a letter, but I won't submit it. I will show it to him and say that I'm going to submit it. The union said, no, you have to submit it. And I just disregarded it. I presented the letter to the person in question. He immediately corrected himself. Had it been any other way, his career could have been damaged, and he could have gone on to be the negative person that he was. So, again, it gets back to a collaborative, family group effort. I mean, there certainly are many circumstances where you're the boss, you have to be the boss, but you don't have to be mean-spirited about it. You don't have to be cruel about it. And that way everybody becomes more productive.
Yeah, one thing that I love about what you're saying is it is a family atmosphere, and some departments I've talked to where, like potentially for producers, where it's they're sometimes they can feel like they're by themselves, but with the art department, among the overarching family, you do have your core team and your team that you are family members and you can lean on and rely on.
And every department is like that.
Yeah.
Every department, at its best, is like that. They're protective of one another. They're cooperative and collaborative of one another. And that's the best way to work. And in the perfect world, each of those groups of individuals or crafts interacts with the other groups in the same way. So it can be even at the worst of times can be, I've had a recent experience where the show itself was fairly brutal, but the interdepartmental communication and interaction was fantastic. Like everybody walked away respecting one another, and that was great. And there is one really great thing about this business is if you do run into somebody who doesn't fit in to the process, you never have to see them again.
This is very true. Well, that's why I always think, if I'm having a rough experience and it's like, oh, well, if I go on to another show, I will have a completely different experience with someone else.
Every time.
And there's so many different personality types in this industry that you're bound to get the bad apple, but you're bound to get so many plentiful bowls of good apples.
Yeah, well, as I said before, in an industry made up of alpha personalities, clashes or confrontations are inevitable, but it's just part of what you do.
Definitely. Awesome. So we've reached the section that I've been sent in a bunch of questions from fellow colleagues of the industry, and I'd love to hit you with a quick fire questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, number one, are there ever moments as a PD where you can relax and think it's all coming together? And what would that moment be if there is one?
Yeah, surprisingly frequently. The best time for me, and I'm not alone in this, is the night before a new set opens. Walking into a new set by yourself and absorbing it and being happy with what your department has done is the best feeling.
Yeah. I could imagine, especially being the production designer, seeing all the weeks of hard work that has gone into making that set and then seeing like this is what it's all come to fruition.
There are so many people involved in making whatever comes out of this work that being appreciative of those people. I mean, there's no feeling like it. And then the director comes in. But no, it's a funny business. I was propping a show years ago with a very famous director. And it was an odd circumstance because he had been parachuted in. He had underwritten a couple of rookie directors, and the deal was, if these guys don't perform, you got to come in, and it happened. And he came in, and every morning, this guy would throw some kind of a curveball at me. Something he had to have for the first shot. And I'd have to scramble. And I'd get it done. And one day he asked me for a completely ridiculous item. What had happened to be is he had seen at a kitchen sink, and it was one of those copper pot scrubbers. He had to have one. And it was 6:30 in the morning. So I sent one of the guys out to find the pot scrubber, and I asked the director to step behind the set with me for a minute. And I said, "What is going on?" He looked at me and he said, "I didn't want to do this job. I'm an old man. When I go home, I want to sleep. When I come in at work, it's the only time I have to prep for the day, so I have to buy some time." And I said, "Okay."
You're like, oh,
so for the whole rest of the show, he would come up with a drama in the morning. I would solve the drama, and life would go on. And nobody knew about it but he and I. It was great. It was great. I don't know where that came from, but it's part of that. It's part of that whole family thing, I guess.
Definitely. It's amazing. And certainly something that I'm sure other people might have experiences like that in other industries, but it's something special for this one.
You have to. It is. It's special. What else you got?
Okay, number 2. What are the most important qualities of a production designer?
Creativity, communication, interpretation, not to be colorblind.
Perfect. Number 3.
Education, knowledge.
Getting the experience in the other departments as well. What's your strategy in maintaining a business and personal relationship with your team?
I don't know. I don't know. It's not. I think for me, it's not needing to prove that I'm smarter than anybody else. Everybody's there. Everybody who's there has a function, a job. Respect for the fact that they will do that job goes a long way towards making the department work.
Definitely. What was your process like to get your position as a union PD for larger shows? Was there a process?
Well, no, luck. No, it was. I think I touched on it earlier when we're off camera. It was a matter of being in the right place at the right time, and beyond that, it's word of mouth. And that's, I mean, that was very early. I mean, I was lucky. I had great directors to work with: Joel Schumacher, Jonathan Kaplan. Doesn't get better than that. And mutual respect and communication.
I think there's this there's a saying that luck can only get you so far, and you need the experience to back it up. And I think, especially with what you're saying, you've had that experience, and you've always sought out that knowledge to achieve what you've achieved as well.
There's also a lot to be said for keeping an open mind. I mean, I touched on this earlier. It is to understand that your solution isn't the only solution. To understand that that it can come from somewhere else, or it can come from somewhere else in your own brain.
Having the 5 different solutions for the
Five different
problem.
solutions is not too many.
No, it's not. Are there any design trends that you would like to set on fire?
You know, I'm pretty comfortable with the niche that I'm in. I don't mind skirting around the perimeter of science fiction, but everything that I love to do is based in reality. It's based on in human beings and interaction with one another, and that's where I feel the most comfortable. As far as genres, what do you got? You know, I've done horror, I've done family drama, I've done procedural, but it's all about the people. I mean, my favorite television shows are one that I did myself, Breaking Bad, which I didn't, by the way, watch until almost 3 years after it was released. The Wire. They're all about human beings. So that's my best job is to make the reality for those human beings.
If ever, what do you do when you hit a creative block?
Go to the other 4 answers. Eventually, it resolves itself, either through support from your peers or support from other members of the production team, like the director, the writers, that kind of thing. I'm not, because I like working in reality. Blocking is not such a big issue for me. Science fiction, I'd be lost. Some of the stuff that some of my peers do, I bow to them because I couldn't touch them with a barge pole, and it's got as much to do with preference as anything else.
Yeah, no, it's very. I always think, especially on sets, that the one job, if I tried to get into it, that I don't think I could ever do is the art. Any person's in the art job, because mine's very logistical brain, and even when my partner brings me on to like help set decorate, I'm like, I can move this stuff for you, but I can't place it for you.
Well, there's a significant amount of logistics involved in the art department, but it's it's more easily broken down, generally more easily broken down than, say, scheduling and actor availability.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there are so many wild cards in there that you just don't. I mean, this recent COVID crisis, man, I wouldn't want to be a first AD for all the money in the world. You know, having busloads of teenagers go out and partying, and half of them dropping with COVID.
Yeah. We need 100 people, and we
don't need that. So there's logic. It's just a different kind of logic.
Yeah, different wheelhouse. Yeah. What's the best designed movie in your mind that you've seen?
Of mine?
In your mind, like that. Anyone that you've seen, it could have been one of yours.
Well, I can't answer that. The
Totally
most recent,
yeah.
And this is largely because I didn't expect it to be as good as it was. It was Barbie.
Yeah.
She killed that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, the amount of shades of pink that they managed to
incorporate. No. And that's, I mean, that is, she killed it. That's a recent thing.
No, I couldn't agree more. That movie was phenomenal in so many different aspects, and especially, I don't know, I love the whole thing of they ran out of pink paint in the world.
Yeah, yeah. And what the hell's the name of that? There's a couple of Western series that I thought really stood out too. Is it's gone. It's a few years old now, but yeah, Barbie for sure. Braveheart, which is I would watch anytime. Anything that Henry Bumstead ever did in his life.
Well, what's your favorite piece of your work that you've done?
Well, overall, it would be, and this is in no particular order, the meth lab in Breaking Bad, Willard, Bates Motel, Final Destination, parts of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much again for coming on and joining us here today, Mark. I really appreciate you for taking the time out of your day and joining us and sharing all your experiences and your knowledge.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here. I have to say I support what you're doing, because the industry's changing rapidly, and the way to keep it fresh and alive is to bring fresh and alive people in who really want to be here. And having some insight into the mechanics of how we work is important. People can sit down, look at what the various professionals in the business are doing, and decide whether or not it's something they want to.
Yeah, seeing the niceties and the grit of the industries.
Well, there's some stories, but
Yeah, most definitely.
what I will say is I don't. There isn't a day that I'm not grateful that I do this for a living. It can be really bad, but it's so much better than the alternatives.
100%. And now, if someone's watching this and maybe a world-class producer seeing this and they want to bring you on, is there anything that you'd like to plug, or even a website that we can find you on or look at your work?
If they want me, they can find me.
Awesome. We'll find you. Perfect. Well, thank you so much again, and that's a wrap.